Hello, it's Cary Fridley, and I'm going to tell you about the classical music trip that I took to Germany in 1992. In 1992, I had just graduated from college, and my brother was in the army in Fulda, Germany. I went there to meet my mom and dad, who were already there visiting him. We all traveled to Salzburg, which is the birthplace of Mozart and where he lived and grew up, and he served on the court as a young man in Salzburg before he moved to Vienna. Then I went to visit my boyfriend in Leipzig, who was in a summer German language immersion program. We went to Bach's church in Leipzig, and then we went to Vienna. Then I rejoined my parents, and we visited Neuschwanstein Castle, which is King Ludwig's castle. That's right. Where Richard Wagner would visit and perform his operas. Here is a picture of Salzburg that I took out the window of a building up on the hill. So these are actual photographs that I had to take to the store and get developed back in the old days before digital photography. But you can see in this picture it still looks the same as it did in Mozart's time in many ways. Here's another picture of the downtown area. It's just an interesting statue and fountain. And this is the Residenzplatz Square and Residence Fountain in Salzburg. This is the Opera House in Salzburg that was built in the early days of opera, which would be in the Baroque era, and they still use it today. So imagine every sizable town having their own opera house and having their own operas, and all the people going to hear the same music. All right, here we are in Leipzig, and this was my boyfriend in college, Stephen. So shout out to Stephen with a PH. We were in chorus together, and he loved classical music too. So this is a statue of Johann Sebastian Bach. And as I said, this was where he worked for his entire professional life. And he wrote all the music for the church, and there was a music school at the church, and he was in charge of all that. And as we all know, J.S. Bach had far-reaching effects on the entire world with his music. This is inside Bach's church. So You can see in the ceiling, it's a more modern style architecture than the old cathedrals. Do you remember what kind of church Bach was in? He's in the Lutheran Church because he's one of the first composers that wrote music for congregational singing, and that's what a lot of his music is. Hymns for church. So this is the Lutheran Church that was built after the Protestant Reformation. And so Bach had quite the opportunity and motivation and inspiration to write this new style of music. Here's another picture of Bach's church inside, looking back the other way. Here are some of the carvings in the stone inside of the church. Now, this is very Baroque, ornamented, intricate, detailed, decorated, over the top. And I'm not sure who the people are. I am thinking they might be the saints. Not sure. But this is very Baroque. Now, this was one of the side passageways on the side, and it could be used as a chapel on its own. And this is a small chapel organ that you can see at the end. I think there were 3 organs, if I remember correctly, and I have a picture of the big organ in the next slide. Yes, so here we go. 2 more organs in Bach's church, and the main organ is on the left in the center of the sanctuary. But these pipes on the right, another organ. You can see, get a sense of the size with the person there. Look how big. Imagine what the organ sounded like playing Bach fugues. Imagine Bach playing the fugues in the church. Incredible. All right, now we are going to Vienna, Austria. And here is a photograph of the Vienna Cathedral, which was built in the 12th century. And it's one of the most important examples of Gothic architecture in all of Austria. So older than Bach's church. Here we are inside the Vienna Cathedral. So it's a little blurry. I'm feeling like I didn't want to use the flash. I wanted to get a sense of the natural light, which makes it harder to hold the camera still enough. But still, you get a sense for how beautiful it is inside. Here's another shot of the same vantage point, a little closer, and I believe I used the flash this time so you can see some more detail of the altar there. When we were in Vienna, we visited the central cemetery where many famous composers are buried. Also in Vienna is Monument Park. And if you'll remember from the classical music era, Mozart was buried in a common grave with a bunch of other people. And there was no marker on his grave. So they do not know where Mozart's buried. So there are several monuments to him in Vienna and in Salzburg because there is no gravestone or grave in the cemetery for Mozart. And this is one of the memorials to Mozart. This is Bruckner's grave, Anton Bruckner. He was a romantic composer. This is another statue of Mozart that's in Monument Park in Vienna. And this is a woman in the park feeding the pigeons. Here is the Goethe statue, the Goethe Monument in Monument Park in Vienna. Now, do you remember where you've heard about Goethe? He was a poet, and the composers in Germany would use Goethe's poems for their German Lieder. Lieder, plural of Lied, is German art song. Now, their favorite type of poems for the Lieder during the Romantic era, Schubert was one of the Lieder composers. Their favorite poems were dark, suspenseful, kind of like horror poems from the Sturm und Drang school. So Sturm und Drang means storm and stress. So that's what was popular back then. And Goethe was one of the leading writers in that literary movement. This is a close-up of the Mozart statue from a few slides ago. Here is the statue of Franz Schubert, an incredible composer. I love his piano compositions. I love listening to them. Beautiful. And he's also known for his lieder. So this is a statue of Beethoven. And it's a more modern statue, but I remember being very taken with it and even seeing it now. It's very cool. So this is also in Vienna at the Monument Park. They had some statues inside in a building. Here's another view of the Beethoven statue. Now this was something very interesting to see. This is Beethoven's life mask. So in 1812, there was a sculptor that wanted to do a display of statues of famous musicians, and then they were going to have a concert of the musicians, and Beethoven's one of the composers. So they made a plaster mask of his face in 1812. So in a time when there wasn't photographs, this just, it feels like you can really see what he looked like. And there are different sculptures and statues that have been made based on this life mask from 1812 of Beethoven. And this makes me think of a theory that is going around, unproven theory. There are people that believe that Beethoven was black. And this mask, it makes me think, I don't know, maybe. And so as you learn more about Beethoven, now you know what his face actually looked like. All right, thanks for bearing with me on my little slideshow of my vacation. We're going to take one more stop. We're hiking to Neuschwanstein, King Ludwig's castle. And then I'm going to transition to talking about Wagner and King Ludwig. And we'll talk about Wagner's operas. So we had to hike up a mile or two up the road to get to the top of the mountain where the castle was located. So here's some flowers from along the way. I saw a salamander. And this is another castle across the way. Isn't it beautiful? And here is Neuschwanstein off in the distance. If it looks familiar, in the Disney movie Cinderella, her castle is based on Neuschwanstein. And if you go to Disney World, Cinderella's castle is based on Neuschwanstein. I forgot we had one more stop. I rejoined my family in the Bavarian Alps, took the train, and we went to Hitler's summer residence, and it's the place where he committed suicide. It was his last hideout place. Pretty morbid stop. My brother is in the military, and he was interested in the war history. So these are the mountains where he had his summer residence. It's pretty impressive. Here's a view from the hike. This is my brother when we reach the top, and as you can see, it's swarming with tourists already up there. And back to Fulda. Here's a shot of the medieval church in Fulda. And that's the end of the trip. This is at the zoo in Frankfurt. Now here's a little more historical information about King Ludwig and Richard Wagner, and some visuals. It was an interesting relationship these two had. Wagner is the composer on the right, and Ludwig ends up being known as the Mad King. But he loved Wagner's music, and he loved Wagner. It's rumored he had a crush on Wagner, and he would always want him to come visit, and he would go to his operas, and he gave him a place to work at Neuschwanstein. Here's some basic information about King Ludwig from Wikipedia. So he lived from 1845 to 1886, was King of Bavaria from 1864 until his death in 1886. He is sometimes called the Swan King or the Fairy Tale King. He also held the titles of Count Palatine of the Rhine, Duke of Bavaria, Duke of Franconia, and Duke in Swabia. He succeeded to the throne at age 18. 2 years later, Bavaria and Austria fought a war against Prussia, which they lost. However, in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, Bavaria sided with Prussia against France, and after the Prussian victory, it became part of the new German Empire led by Prussia. Though Bavaria retained a degree of autonomy on some matters within the new German and architectural Reich, within the new German Reich, Ludwig increasingly withdrew from day-to-day affairs in favor of extravagant artistic and architectural projects. He commissioned the construction of 2 lavish palaces and Neuschwanstein Castle, and he was a devoted patron of the composer Richard Wagner. Ludwig spent all his royal revenues, although not state funds, on these projects, borrowed extensively, and defied all attempts by his ministers who tried to restrain him. This extravagance was used against him to declare him insane, an accusation which has since come under scrutiny. Today, his architectural and artistic legacy includes many of Bavaria's most important tourist attractions. Here is the story about Ludwig and Wagner. Ludwig was intensely interested in the operas of Richard Wagner. This interest began when Ludwig first saw Lohengrin, which is an opera, Wagner's opera, at the impressionable age of 15 and a half, followed by Tannhauser 10 months later. Wagner's operas appealed to the king's fantasy-filled imagination. One of the young Ludwig's first acts as king was to summon his idol, Richard Wagner, to court. On May 4th, 1864, the 51-year-old Wagner was given an unprecedented 1 3/4 hour audience with the king. Wagner wrote after meeting the young king, "Today I was brought to him. He is unfortunately so beautiful and wise, soulful and lordly, that I fear his life must fade away like a divine dream in this base world. You cannot imagine the magic of his regard. If he remains alive, it will be a great miracle." Ludwig was completely smitten with Wagner, as this letter to him reveals. "Love has strength for you all. You are the star that shines upon my life, and the sight of you ever wonderfully strengthens me. Ardently I long for you, O my presiding saint, to whom I pray. I should be immensely pleased to see my friend here in about a week. Oh, we have plenty to say. If only I could quite banish from me the curse of which you speak, and send it back to the deeps of night from whence it sprang. How I love you, my one, my highest good. My enthusiasm and love for you are boundless. Once more I swear you faith till death. Ever, ever your devoted Ludwig." Quite a letter. A year after meeting the king, Wagner presented his latest work, Tristan and Isolde, in Munich to great acclaim. However, the composer's perceived extravagant and scandalous behavior in the capital was unsettling for the conservative people of Bavaria, and the king was forced to ask Wagner to leave the city 6 months later, in December 1865. Ludwig considered abdicating to follow Wagner, but Wagner persuaded him to stay. Ludwig provided the Tribschen residence for Wagner in Switzerland. Wagner completed Die Meistersinger there, his opera. It was premiered in Munich in 1868. When Wagner returned to his Ring cycle, Ludwig demanded special previews of the first 2 works, Das Reinhold and Die Valkyrie, at Munich in 1869 and 1870. The Ring cycle is several operas in one. Wagner, however, was now planning his great personal opera house at Bayreuth. Ludwig initially refused to support the grandiose project. However, when Wagner exhausted all other sources, he appealed to Ludwig, who loaned him 100,000 thalers to complete the work. Ludwig also paid for the von Fried villa for Wagner and his family to reside in. Constructed from 1872 to 1874. In 1876, Ludwig attended the dress rehearsal and 3rd public performance of the complete Ring cycle at Festspielhaus. So without Ludwig, we wouldn't have had these wonderful Wagner operas. Here is a promotional picture of Neuschwanstein. You can see it in all its glory. Inside the castle, Ludwig created an underground grotto and cave where he would paddle around. What I remember seeing on my tour was off one of the rooms was a cave filled with sparkling gemstones, rubies and amethyst. And he built that. It was just incredible. Here is the opera theater that is inside Neuschwanstein that Ludwig made for for Wagner, to put on his operas for him. So it's his own opera house for himself. And I remember seeing this on the tour, and there are scenes from Wagner's operas painted on all the walls.